Hello and welcome to Charch Chat here at Open Sports. I'm Paul Charchian from LeagueSafe.com. It's our early week recap of what happened last week, where we go through everything meaningful to fantasy players from Sunday's action. And there was a lot to get to on Sunday, a lot of big surprises. And let's start rolling up our sleeves here as we count down the weeks until a coronation of a champion in your fantasy league. We begin with Chad Pennington, who another strong game, and it just very unflashy, and he throws to a bunch of nobodies, touchdowns here, but it's another strong game for him, and the kind of guy that sneaks under the radar and ends up winning some games and for your fantasy league. And well, is he going to single-handedly beat opponents? No, but he doesn't do anything to hurt you either, and that's what you like about Pennington if you've got one of those teams that's really strong at the rest of the roster. A note to Fred Jackson, who had one of the great touchdowns of the Bills season and one of the best of the weekend, where he got the handoff at about the 5-yard line, got met at about the 4-yard line by about 4 different Jet defenders, and he dragged them into the end zone. It was an awesome touchdown for Fred Jackson, and I know that hurt Marshawn Lynch owners, but at least you can take some solace in the fact that Jackson absolutely earned it. And also interesting that Marshawn Lynch, who had really been staying in that like 70 to 80 yard range for all year, last month he's suddenly putting up big yardage games. And so, a glimmer of hope for next year. And I think you're going to see a lot of people next year that are going to get enthused about him. And we'll see Marshawn Lynch go at the end of the first round in a lot of leagues. Ronnie Brown ran the ball well, 67 yards, but only 10 carries. And considering the Dolphins were ahead by a lot, I really thought we'd get more carries for him, and Ricky Williams didn't even take that many carries away from him and was a lot less productive. So disappointing me. He ran well. I'm disappointed that Ronnie Brown didn't get the ball more often, and that seems to be an ongoing issue here. And that's part of why it's really hard to get really excited about Ronnie Brown. It's just, the touchdowns are sporadic, and I almost wish that big Patriots game hadn't happened because so many people have put him in their starting lineup with high expectations the rest of the year, and almost always it hasn't panned out. Thomas Jones ended up scoring another touchdown, got this one early. He has now scored in every game since week 7. Amazing for Thomas Jones, and I think a lot of what happened here, you look, they replaced both of the guards in the offensive line for the Jets in the offseason. Took them about a month, 6 games to really get clicking, and then once that offensive line got on the same page, it's been a different story, and they've been very, very productive, and Thomas Jones has been a fantasy workhorse. Also in that game, good to see Coles and Cotchery back involved again. Those guys had disappeared for 3 weeks. They got their catches. Cotchery ended up scoring. Coles ended up being the leading receiver in the game. So good to see them back. Favre's still looking iffy. He had a really good first half and a really bad second half. So I'm, disappointing for a lot of fantasy guys. And I believe 1 touchdown pass in the last 3 games. Yuck. He ran that one in, but not a lot. Let's see, what's next? Michael Turner got the overtime, and the overtime ended up meaning a lot to a lot of fantasy players in milestone scoring formats where getting to 150 is a big deal for you. If he needed the overtime, he got there. He got to 150, and that's a lot of extra points in a lot of leagues if you get to 150, so the overtime definitely helped him out. I believe Michael Turner will be the number 1 player taken in a lot of leagues next year. You can make a case for Adrian Peterson, but I think people are going to feel like Turner is got more touchdowns. He doesn't get sniped for touchdowns like Chester Taylor does as much to Adrian Peterson. So, I really believe that he's going to end up being the number 1 player taken next year in most drafts. Clinton Portis was mollified with 25 carries, but only turned it into 77 yards and has now not scored in 6 straight games. Yuck. Clinton Portis, who was so good early, absolutely crushing your fantasy hopes, dashing them in the second half of the season. Andre Johnson, 200 yards against an elite Tennessee secondary. Tennessee had only allowed 2 wide receiver scores all season prior to this game. Andre Johnson, 200 yards and the touchdown, man. He's good. You already know he's good. He's really good, and this goes to show that you don't bench him against anybody. There you go. Chris Johnson and Lendell White in that game both struggled, did not do very well, 65 and 25 yards respectively, and no touchdowns in a game that I thought, this is the Houston run defense. It's average at best. I really thought that we'd get a lot more out of those guys. Very disappointed. Speaking of disappointing performances, LaDainian Tomlinson, 39 yards against the Chiefs. Come on. Sure, he got the touchdown, but it should have been 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's absurd, and it's a disappointment for an ongoing disappointment this season for LT. Just one game where he just every game he does not meet the expectations of what we thought we were going to get from LT. Dominic Rhodes had a nice game, filling in 2 touchdowns for Joseph Adai, and Adai season another disappointment, and I keep using that word, but these running back disappointments, just one after another. These guys that were first rounders, and very frustrating, but Rhodes ended up looking pretty good against the Lions, scored a couple of times, and you're almost better off with Adai out, because a lot of you've got Adai and Rhodes. Then you don't have to worry about shared time nearly as much. Rhodes gets the overwhelming majority of the work, and you can just go to war with that. When Adai's in, it's almost split 50-50 now between Rhodes and Adai, and amazing. Hard to believe Rhodes was just let go by the Raiders. I got to believe there are a lot of teams, like, say, the Bengals, that really wish that they'd have jumped on Rhodes. Ryan Fitzpatrick continues to impress, speaking of the Bengals. Really, this kid, I'm not saying he's the next Montana, but Ryan Fitzpatrick is a good player, and he's making some nice throws. He's learning on the job. He's really evolved a lot, and there's a good chance that Carson Palmer's not going to be ready for the beginning of next year, because he's prolonged what will probably be Tommy John surgery a long time. I mean, he could have gone under the knife whenever this thing first went down, early October, I believe. And, he could have put some extra months of recuperation time in, a little bit like Jake Delhomme. He had, he went down early in the season, and so he had almost a full year of recuperation from Tommy John. I'm worried that Carson Palmer, by delaying this and trying to get better and trying to avoid surgery, is going to end up delaying the inevitable. He goes under the knife in January, and then has to try to come back quickly. It won't be ready. Ryan Fitzpatrick could very easily be your starter for the Bengals next season for opening day. Tarvaris Jackson with a shockingly good game, 4 touchdown passes. It was the first Viking quarterback to throw 4 touchdown passes in 9 games. That's amazing. Dante Culpepper, 2004 is how long it had been, and he looked good. That said, it was Arizona. They came into this game allowing the most passing touchdowns in the NFL. They get a much tougher test against a really underrated Falcons secondary this coming week, and then they get the Giants. So, if you're thinking about jumping on Tarvaris Jackson, I don't know that I would. I think a grain of salt here. I'm not totally sold on him. This was a bad secondary. The Cardinals were out of it early, and it just, he looked good, but I don't think you're going to be starting him the rest of the year, and so I'd show some caution here. The Vikings will probably be starting him the rest of the year. I don't know that you will. Tyler Thigpen. Good and bad. I mean, if you have Larry Johnson, it's a disaster, because Tyler Thigpen has been stealing his touchdowns. He's such a good runner. They're running him inside the 5. He got the short touchdown on Sunday, and very frustrating for a lot of fantasy owners. And I certainly wouldn't blame fantasy owners that are frustrated without having Larry Johnson. But if you've got Thigpen, man, you gotta love this kid's skill set. He's super mobile. He can throw on the run. He's fearless. He's got a pretty live arm, and I tell you what, the Chiefs, this kid's going to be a player, and I think they're going to go into next year with him as their starting quarterback, and they've got a real find with this one. Matt Cassel, the 4 touchdowns against Oakland, it's part of that game in really bad field conditions. Oakland's been a pretty good secondary, so I'm surprised. I was not crazy about Cassel as a start, and I was especially worried about Moss going up against Nnamdi Asomugha. Moss had a couple of touchdowns, so. Yeah, this is it was a nice outing for Cassel, who I think at this point you can safely start against anything other than elite pass defenses. And while Oakland is good, they're probably not that elite level. Next, Cedric. What do I? Oh, that's it. Last thing. Sorry, I had to check my crib notes. Denver's running back by committee is back in full force, and frustratingly so. Your leading rusher, P.J. Pope. Come on. Tatum Bell. I mean, they had Tatum Bell going. They bring back Selvin Young, and P.J. Pope is your leading. And then he's 7 carries, right? Which isn't a lot to begin with. But then it's 6 for Young and 5. Was it 6 for? Yeah, I think it was 6. It was 6 for Young, then 5 for Tatum Bell. I mean, come on. It's right back to the running back by committee that we've all come to know and hate in Denver, and very, very frustrating. So whatever you were vibing on the Denver running back situation when Hills was in and things were working out for fantasy owners, it's dead, and it's the old Mike Shanahan. He's back. All right, thank you for sticking to the end of what is always these Monday recaps are always a lengthy chat. So I appreciate you sticking out to the very, very end of it. We'll be back every day this week, of course, to get you ready to win in what is the championship or semifinals for pretty much everybody over these next 2 weeks. If you have any questions for our fantasy department, email us fantasy@opensports.com.
So you think you can tackle a pro? There's only one way to find out. Click on fantasy@opensports.com.